Hi everyone, I'm Miss Cardona, and today we'll be learning about the scientific method. You may have heard this term before, and if you're not too sure what it is, then this video is for you. In today's lesson, you will be able to identify the 6 steps of the scientific method process, and you'll also be able to view an example of applying or using the scientific method steps. Have you ever had a question about the world, like what plants need in order to grow, or how to blow bigger bubbles? Well, there is a way to find the answer to these and other questions that is actually used by scientists. It is called the scientific method. If you use it, you can be a scientist too. The scientific method is a process or method of research. But in simpler terms, it is a way to ask and answer scientific questions by making observations and conducting experiments. By doing these observations and experiments, we can establish true facts. There are 6 simple steps to follow when using the scientific method, which we will closely explore together. So, what are the 6 steps to the scientific method? Briefly, they are the following. 1. Making an initial observation. 2. Asking a question. 3. Forming a hypothesis. 4. Conducting an experiment or testing the hypothesis. Number 5. Analyzing the gathered data. And lastly, number 6. Drawing a conclusion. Now let's take a closer look to each of the steps of the process while also viewing an example of it. Let's build some simple insight into the scientific method by looking at an example with these plants shown. The first step is to make an observation and also do some research on the topic. I can observe that these basil plants are wilting. Wilting means that they are drooping or perhaps even dying. Observation means to study carefully. Once you have observed and researched your problem, you can then ask a question about that observation. Based on the observations, you can ask a question or multiple questions and also identify the problem you would like to solve. In this case, my question is, why are the basil plants wilting? Let's find out. Step 3 is to form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess about how something works or isn't working. Another term for an educated guess is to form a prediction. In order to be useful, a hypothesis needs to be testable. This means that you can actually test whether it is true or not what you are guessing or predicting. In this example, my hypothesis is that I forgot to water the basil plants. I predict that if I water them, I could revive them. After making a prediction, I can now design or conduct an experiment and test that hypothesis. When designing an experiment, you must be sure to only test one thing at a time. You can do this by making sure to only change one thing or one variable in each experiment. By only testing one thing at a time, I can actually find out if that specific action or variable, like watering the plant, will be effective or true to helping them revive. In this case, I will water only one of the plants over a few days. I will not water the other plant to see if my hypothesis about reviving them is true or not. Once you have completed the experiment, you will move on to step 5, which indicates to analyze the data and information that was gathered or collected. To do this, you will look at the results of your experiment and try to figure out what it actually means. You will see if your initial prediction was correct or not. I analyzed that after a couple days of watering that one basil plant, it returned to its healthy state, whereas the plant that didn't get watered wilted even further. Finally, using the data, you can draw a conclusion. My prediction or hypothesis was correct. The plants were wilting because I didn't water them. If your conclusion does not support or agree with your hypothesis, that's okay. It doesn't mean it was a bad experiment. Using that information gathered from that first experiment, you can form a new hypothesis and create a new experiment to test it. Furthermore, if your conclusion does support your hypothesis, you may have a new question you'd like to test, and you can begin the scientific method process all over again. The scientific method is a step-by-step way to solve problems and answer questions logically. Thanks to the scientific method, many important discoveries have been made about our world, but many unanswered questions still remain. Would you like to help answer them? You can. Just remember to be scientific. How can you be scientific? By making observations, asking questions, forming a hypothesis, conducting an experiment and testing that hypothesis, analyzing data, and drawing a conclusion. I hope you can now use the scientific method process with any questions you may have about the world. Thanks for watching!